6 o'clock, I guess we can start. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you for joining this second artist talk in a series of programs for Faces in the Pandemic exhibit, which contextualizes our moment in history in 2020, a year highlighted by COVID-19 and the Asian American identity during the pandemic, the deep-seated racism exacerbated by the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd due to police brutality, the social unrest, as well as the upcoming election. My name is Ann Shi. I'm the Associate Curator for the Houston Asian American Archive. Our panel of artists tonight is Victor Ancheta and Brendan Todd Harris. Both artists, besides being both students and alumni of University of Houston, their creative processes are rooted in their ancestral history, intergenerational and diasporic trauma, and now in the bigger frame of our current social and political issues. Both artists are also part of the LGBTQ community with creative works that examines their identity. And I just want to thank the Outsmart magazine, who has helped us engage more audiences from the LGBTQ community with this talk. And I hope you guys have brought some questions for the artists to dive deeper into the conversations. And we encourage, of course, all our audience to ask questions, which will be answered by the panel and at the end of the talk. So to introduce our artist tonight, Brendan Todd Harris is a native Houstonian, born and raised. He's currently a senior at the University of Houston pursuing BFA in digital media and photography. His creative practices examine the Vietnamese diaspora and the intergenerational trauma as child of war refugees. In his recent oral history interview with us, he spoke of the experience of his grandmother taking 4 children, from oldest at 10 years old and youngest at 2 years old, to flee Vietnam on a boat. With the audience can find out more through his our history interview on our website. He projects many of his family's archives, which includes old photographies, stories from memories, and incorporates them into his art via digital media, video and photography, installation, and performances. His work has been featured in exhibitions at the Houston Center for Photography and the Blaffer Art Museum. Harris projects have also been funded by grants from the Idea Fund and Houston Arts Alliance. Currently, he's pursuing the Bachelor of Fine Arts at the University of Houston with a concentration of photography and digital media. And our second artist tonight is Victor Ancheta, who is a Filipino artist and writer who is a member of the LGBTQ community. He immigrated to the United States at 13 years old after spending his childhood in the Philippines. Ancheta was raised Catholic, which has created a conflict with himself and this religion, which he can tell us more about later, and how it influences his artistic practices. He is a graduate of high school for the performing and visual arts and studied studio arts and creative writing at the University of Houston downtown. Victor has exhibited at Lawndale Art Center and the Contemporary Arts Museum, and most recently at Avenue 50 Studios and Morbid Anatomy at Greenwood in Brooklyn. He received the Emergent Artist Award from the Bio City Art Festival, and his writings has also been published in a number of um, publications, including the Bio Review and Slate. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our artists to talk more about their works.
So, hi guys, I'm Victor Ancheta. I'm an artist who mainly works in installation, sculpture, and painting. And I work with a lot of several themes, mostly family, Catholicism, gender, colonialism, and my experience as an immigrant. So those are the things that you will see with a lot of my works tonight. I graduated from HSPVA, and after a brief stint in trying to study nursing, I graduated with a minor in studio arts and creative writing from UHD. So the first piece that I'm going to talk about is Ina ng Saklolo, Our Lady of Help. The first thing that you see about this piece is that it is missing its eyes and it's missing limbs. So um, there is it's a commentary on blind faith, and how people are very much just kind of like dependent on the above or on the Almighty. Um, and what I'm trying to say with this piece really is that, you know, there really is no help coming from the above. It's all about you. But this piece at the same time is also a self-portrait. At the time that I was starting to make this piece, I became undocumented. And when you're undocumented, you feel very helpless and you feel, less than human. And um, there's a saying that my great grandma used to say, and it is that the eyes are the windows to the soul. And that resonated a lot to me. And, you know, with with all this in the background of me being undocumented, me being gay, I just was just feeling very much like I did not have a soul. So I started to create sculptures without eyes and limbs, um, basically, and trying to work my feelings and trying to just like make sense of it all. Um, the second piece I'm going to talk about is maize, or maize, which is corn in Tagalog. And it's a piece dedicated to my dad. So this piece is about family. My dad passed away when I was really young. He died when I was 3 years old from a heart attack. And at 3 years old, I was very much aware of what that meant. I knew that my dad um, was dead and was never coming back. So when they told me that my dad passed away, I went into his room and locked myself. Um, and I wouldn't let anyone near us, wouldn't let anybody near his body, and I was just like, for some weird reason, like just very protective of my father's corpse. And the undertaker was already um, waiting, to take to take my dad's body to the morgue, and no one could coax me out of his room, except for my nanny who offered me corn. And so I was like, sure, I will exchange my dad for corn. So I opened the door and I did finally let him take my dad's body, only, with a promise of corn. Um, so in this piece, you can see a heron and a butterfly. And a lot of these are Filipino symbols. Butterfly is a symbol for really like hope. And the heron is a symbol of longevity. And so I try to like work with a lot of symbolism into my pieces. Itlog, or egg. Um, so this is a piece of me trying to queer traditional Spanish colonial ex voto art forms. Ex voto art forms are basically like, it's a Catholic art, where a devotee is asking for help, to various saints or to a god or to the Virgin Mary. And you will never see gay couples in these kind of works. But so but for me, I wanted to do something that would make would sort of like push this tradition. So I have my husband on the left, my beautiful husband, and me on the right, and we are offering an egg and a candle to the Virgin Mary, um, in thanking her for my green card. Um, so yeah, it's just a really nice piece. I think that's just sort of like, um, making fun of this traditional like art form, but at the same time, like also paying respect to it in some odd way by rendering ourselves in the style that is very much indicative of that art form. So Pusidana or Putangina Mo, um, this is a fun piece for me. This is the Virgin Mary, um, Virgin Mary and the Christ Child, and it's making fun of the normal iconography of the Virgin Mary as a seat of wisdom, where the Virgin Mary is presented as a throne for the Christ Child to sit on. So in this piece, I reimagined the Madonna as a Filipina goddess, and the Christ Child in this particular piece is even smaller, and he's holding a limp banana. So, you know, all of the power is in the Virgin Mary, and her cape looks a lot like a labia. Okay, this piece, Refugiados, is an installation I did last year at Baring Memorial. And it's a very, very dear piece to me as an immigrant. Um, in traditional Mexican nativity scenes, they include everybody. So they would, you know, depict, if you look closely on the bottom, they would depict a baker, a seller, a fruit seller, fruit vendors, or people just doing, you know, ordinary things. But to your right, you have the kids who are being held here in the United States, away from their parents and put in cages. And then in the middle, you have the Holy Family trying to cross the border. Um, you know, as an immigrant, I felt really powerless, and felt really strongly about what was happening or what is continuing to happen right now with the United States separating families. And I felt really helpless, and I didn't really know how I could help. But creating this piece gave me some comfort that I was I was doing something. We raised money for Raices, which is an organization that helps with that helps underserved immigrants in legal ways. So right now, their Raices is helping these kids. Okay, so the last two pieces that I'm going to show are pieces that are in the show right now. So the Good Hour. The Good Hour refers the final hour of last hour of a person's life. So the artwork is inspired by the tumultuous times we as a society are currently experiencing, from the pandemic, racial injustices, immigration issues, to the loss of natural resources and climate change. So it's in the form of a clock, and really it's telling, you know, I want to convey that time is running out, but at the same time, time is running out, but at the same time, this is all cyclical. So you have the snake, the Ouroboros in the middle that eats its own tail. So kind of like an illusion that all of this could happen again, or you know, things that are like the pandemic could happen again or will happen again in the future. And the last piece is Escape. And Escape is a wonderful toy. It's a working title for mobile sculpture and it illustrates the effects of the coronavirus on humankind. So 4 tiny people and 4 birds suspended from a hoop symbolize the four corners of the world, collectively the figures and the birds illustrate escape or flight of fancy. They are escaping the coronavirus, which will be in the middle. Um, yeah, but it's also like it's kind of hard to see that it's also escape because they're all tethered together with a red ribbon. So it sort of plays in that, name that are they really going to be able to escape because they're all tethered? So there is some tension happening in this piece. So yeah, that's my those are my pieces.
Thank you, Victor. Brendan, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name is Brandon Harris. A lot of my work deals with my identity and trying to reconcile with the trauma of war, specifically being the child of war refugees from Vietnam, and especially growing up, not really being taught the history of the war and kind of trying to figure it out for myself through oral histories from my family and from my own personal research. A lot of my work stemmed from this photograph. When my family first came to America during the war, they weren't allowed to take any of their photographs or documents with them, so they had to bury them, almost an act of self-erasure, because my grandfather was a soldier in the army, and if they caught him, they would make him fight during the war. So this is so it kind of all started when I had spent some time with my grandmother, photographing her and really talking to her, because I knew my family were war refugees and we came during the war, but I didn't know the full story. So I did some photographs of her, and that's when I really dug deeper into understanding her life and my family's life. And throughout my work, I try to use it as a coping and healing process for them to heal, because they don't have like the way to express their feelings and their thoughts, and really unpacking that trauma that the war caused and understanding it for myself. And especially being born in America and having this disconnect to our homeland in Vietnam, I feel like I'm in this weird in-between space. Just not really being Vietnamese enough, but not really being American enough. And then after speaking with my grandma, it really struck a chord with me that it just really made me question like my identity, and really wanted to dive deep into my identity, not really knowing any history about it. So this is a self-portrait of me with the Vietnam flag, the South Vietnamese flag, in between the light and me on a film photo. And then when I was doing a lot of research on the Vietnam War, most of the imagery that I could find and the articles that I could find were from Americans. And it's so shocking to me how difficult it is to find this information on the Vietnam War, and how these Americans used they had a white savior complex when explaining the war and documenting these poor refugees. And this is literally like a photogram of a Life magazine article from during the war depicting Vietnamese refugees, and even just like the text that they had just really like disturbs me, like hysterical wonder. And I tried to find research and articles about the Vietnam War from Vietnam, but it's almost impossible, and it's over flooded by American literature and American research. So more from that series, I took the photographs from the Life magazines, and I rephotographed them, projecting them onto multiple walls and inserting myself into the projections, kind of in a way of reclaiming this narrative that they tried to portray of Vietnamese refugees. And then my current project that I'm working on right now, Me Việt Nam ơi chúng con vẫn còn đây, which translates to, "Oh Mother Vietnam, we are still here." It explores the Vietnamese resettlement in the Houston and Gulf Coast area. It started off by this photograph on the left that I found when I was researching the history of the resettlement in the Gulf Coast. And that was in Seabrook, Texas, where the KKK were burning a wooden boat that said USS Viet Cong as a way to terrorize the Vietnamese refugees that have migrated to the Gulf Coast. And it was really shocking to me to unpack this history. And in the project, I am exploring these traces of migration and resettlement of these refugees, and exploring like the traces and these space specific places. And some of the other places include East Downtown, which is the old Chinatown of Houston, then the current Chinatown of Houston, micro apartments called village apartment complexes, and then my family homes throughout these spaces. And for the project, I've been collecting wood from reclaimed boats and just wood found in these areas. And I'm reclaiming the term boat person or boat people. And me and a fellow artist and friend of mine, Eric Zambrano, we built a wooden boat that's 8 foot long that we're gonna fill with the land and soil collected from these sites. And I'm going to be physically pulling this boat through these spaces, activating these spaces, and really showing the resilience and the traces of these Vietnamese refugees in the Gulf Coast area that's not really spoke about, especially in research. Most of the research are done in California, but not in the south of Vietnamese refugees, even though we have the 3rd largest population displaced outside of Vietnam. And then this is a photograph of the back of the boat. It was really inspired by these real Vietnamese refugee boats. And I don't understand how they were floating, because it was just like pieces of wood tied together and like hammered together. And miraculously, they worked, and it came, and it saved a lot of people's lives, including my family's life. This is another piece called Nail Art. I wanted to focus on the history of nail culture, especially in the US now, and how it was founded by these strong Vietnamese women, including my family, who owns a hair and nail shop, but they only do hair now. And this is a ethnographic postcard from the 1920s in Vietnam, in Saigon, where I took that photograph and I gold leafed the nails and put rhinestones on them, kind of playing on commercialism and how this was a huge way for these female refugees to make a living, and now they dominate this era of occupation. and this work can be acquired through Jonathan Hobson Gallery starting on October 10th if you're interested. And then for the work that I did for this exhibition, it's called Not Your Virus, and it was created in response to the pandemic and especially the racism that Asian Americans were faced during this time. Like just seeing on the news these Asian Americans being like attacked and spat on because it was because Trump and his China disease, as he calls it. And I took traditional Vietnamese clothing called ao dai, and I deconstructed them and woven them together, creating this strong material. And I also used these Vietnamese hats as well as the structural support. And it really depicts the community, and it really depicts like the Asian American community coming together, being woven, and how weaving creates a stronger bond when we are together. And then this is a close-ups of the weavings itself. It's different types of the ao dai fabrics, and everything is hand sewn because I like to torture myself and really apply labor into the work. And yeah, that's my presentation.
Well, thank you both for such beautiful works and your contribution to the exhibit and making it possible. I guess I just would like to follow up regarding the titles of your works and what it means to like bring the works into the context of the phases in the pandemic, and how the COVID-19 and its healing and mourning has influenced the works.
For my work, Not Your Virus, it was kind of like it's like a clap back to people who perceive Asian Americans as these viruses and like these people who spread diseases. And if you think back to like when Vietnamese refugees came, or like even all refugees, like the history of this movement and how people are being attacked for being like othering, especially like people are getting sprayed down with pesticides, and kind of like hopping back at that. Like if someone did that to me, I will not stand for that, and I will say something. I'll probably just read them. Yeah.
Great, thank you. How about Escape? Yeah, for the titles, can you help us get more understanding on that?
Yeah, so with Escape, there's a little bit of like, um, wanted to really kind of like show that it's people escaping COVID, but at the same time, because they're all tethered, also showing that it's not possible for them to escape. Um, and there's also like a play on word here, like, like, because they're flying, sort of flying. I'm trying to like conjure the word flight of fancy, like, because like right now we're all kind of just like, oh man, I just want for this COVID to be over. So just kind of like a daydreaming quality to it. And the fact that, Escape is made to look like a toy, it's sort of like, it adds to that sort of um, like, to that sort of like surrealistic feeling. Um, the other thing too, actually too, with Escape, I consciously depicted all of the people on top of the birds to be people of color, um, mainly because, people of color are the ones who are being exposed to COVID more than, Anglo-Americans or white people. And it's Yeah.
Yeah, how about the Good Hour?
Mhm.
Yeah, which is also has a neon light, a green neon light aspect to it.
Yeah. So the green neon light, so that's supposed to be, it's such a bleak picture that I wanted to sort of like inject a little bit of hope in there. So green is always a symbol for hope, or a symbol for life. So even though there's a lot of deaths in that piece, there is still life that's gonna, there is still something that's going to happen after this is over. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I believe in your work, there's also the George Floyd being portrayed in that work that has, yeah, along with victims of police brutality and COVID,
Yeah.
and portrait of death herself with a crown of um, the and the memento mori as the mortality, how it like really beautifully ties together this act of mourning for all the brutal reality that happened this year. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah. So it's I've been really, like most of us who have been following the news have been very much like disturbed by recent events, especially the violence towards people of color. And when I was working on this piece, I wanted to somehow do my little part. I wanted to somehow honor George Floyd, and so I had to include him in the piece, even though it seems like we can't. It just seems like we cannot separate the two now. Like COVID is happening, but Black Lives Matter is also happening, and the two has just been sort of put together. Um, and I think for me, it was including him in the piece was just one way for me to make sense of it and do my part. Because as artists, we're supposed to record what's happening right now in some other way.
Great, thank you.
Hmm.
I guess for Brendan, I remember you going to the Black Lives Matter protest when we were interviewing you in June, which is, yeah, like right at the moment when it was happening. Can you share some experiences about that?
Yeah, right when the interview was happening, I was planning on going to the protest right after the interview. And it was just like so much happening all at once with the coronavirus and the protests. And I knew I had to do something about it too by going to the protest. And and I feel like they go hand in hand, this exhibition and the protest itself. Kind of looking back through history, how the Black Panthers would stick up for the Vietnamese refugees and how they fought for our rights here. And I think it's time that Vietnamese, well, not just Vietnamese, but Asian Americans also need to stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matters movement, specifically because there's a lot of anti-Blackness in older generations of Asian families, and I think that's a topic that needs to be addressed.
Great, thank you. And I guess that's also a question from regarding why we make art in times like this, in times of crisis, where people are losing jobs and facing so many realities that are so hard to hear. I see that in Brendan, your work is so beautiful, and it just deals with so much. Trauma with the kind of reconstructing the reality into a beautiful act of weaving. And Victor uses the mortality and the memento mori to deal with mourning and to confront death and to remember the lost lives, but like why we do art now.
I think it's important as artists because we have this platform and we have this privilege to share our thoughts and ideas and just and I think all art is activism in a sense, and it's very powerful tool to use art to unpack these difficult and struggling ideas that it's hard for people to understand because you don't need to know how to like read to understand art. Art is visual, and it really provides a lot of viewers with an idea of how ideas of how and ideas of how art and activism go hand in hand.
Yeah. And I think, you know, as artists, we're all very sensitive types. And doing this is, in a way, therapy, you know, like just ex, expelling all of those thoughts that are bothering us. And, you know, we make art because it's the only way that we can make sense of the world. We make art because it's the only way that we can feel like we can contribute to what's happening or to like make other people aware of, you know, of others. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess next, we talked a little bit about in the introduction how Catholicism is prominent in Victor's work, and also Brendan. I believe you spoke of your earlier like interaction with Catholicism. Like, can you both speak a little bit about how religion and spirituality is has influenced your works?
So with me, it's influenced a lot. The Philippines um, is a majority Catholic country. Over 86% of the population are Catholics. Over 90 consider themselves Christian. So all it's a very it's it's a country very immersed in Catholic tradition or Christian tradition, that it's almost inescapable. You know, I grew up, you know, I went to Catholic school from kindergarten to elementary, and the, one of the first things that you one of the first things that you remember is like, you know, well, in the Philippines, there's just saying like once a Catholic, always a Catholic, which is kind of like, it's just kind of funny, but at the same time, it's true because you do like you do like know what Catholicism is, and so like trying to make sense of and so sorry let me the Philippines is also very anti-gay, in that regards. It's they like gays are tolerated only if they are in the entertainment area or if they're entertaining you. But once you start to ask for like basic human rights for gay marriage, that's a no-no. Like, you know, the Philippines is one of the few countries where you can't even have abortion, where you can't even get divorced. So there's just a lot of things that's the Catholic Church itself is influencing the Philippine government in that regards. Um, so it's a lot. I can't help but like um, be very affected by the Catholicism.
Yeah, can you probably speak a little bit more about the Filipino and the colonial history that probably has also been part of it?
Yeah, so the Philippines was colonized um, by the Spaniards for almost 400 years, and you know, it resulted in a society that is very much um, very much has a colonial mentality. What I mean by colonial mentality is that, they Filipinos would prefer if, you know, people with lighter skin, where, people with lighter skin are considered more beautiful. And it also like, and also created this very crazy Catholic fanaticism almost. Another saying in Filipino is "Cerrado Católico," and that is a closed Catholic. And what that means is that you just follow every every rule that the church does. Like the church, whatever the church says, you do. So like if the church doesn't, uh, so if the church is against abortion, you're also against abortion. You can't really like think for yourself in that regards. Um, and so, like with my works, I try to subvert all of those Catholic images and like put my own spin. Like, with one of the pieces that I showed, Itlog, which shows me and my husband. Like I said, that piece would that piece would be very controversial in the Philippines because, for one thing, they don't recognize gay marriage, and like to the extent that when I was renewing my Philippine passport, and they were going over my application and they saw that I was married to a guy, they literally had me white out my husband's name off of the application because they were like, "Oh, you can't be married to a guy. You have to say that you're single." So it's really like it's very riling, and so a lot of my pieces I try to make sense of that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Brendan, can you speak a little bit about the? You also had a work called State of Ecstasy. I remember that was yeah. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, State of Ecstasy was a video piece that I did, and it explores how queer people create their own sense of communities in these club like spaces, and it takes like a research study on that and how queer people um, and how they explore their identity through these like obscured, dark, hidden spaces. And it's essentially a video piece that my friend Jamie recorded, and just like one night going out in like a little club, just having fun.
Thank you. Next, I'm also wondering, how has this female figure, like for you, Brendan, you come up, like you speak of your grandmother, like quite a lot in your both your art history interview and regarding your work. Can you speak a little bit about how the female figure has been in your work?
Yes. In I think in a lot of like Vietnamese and specifically Asian American families, the female figures like the grandmother is the like highest being, and I feel like there's a high matriarchal society in these cultures. And growing up also like without a dad in my life too has also really helps me appreciate and value the female figures and role models in my life. And also like for me, my grandma is like this gatekeeper of this history of my family's knowledge, because I can only trace my own history to my grandma, and after her I don't know. So I'm throughout my work I'm examining that history and talking to her about it, recording this history.
Thank you. And Victor, would you like to add to that as well?
Yeah, it's like one of this like my great grandma saying of the eyes are the windows to the soul. really just like, took that to heart. And, you're right, Brandon, Southeast Asian cultures are mostly matriarchal, and we're just surrounded by strong women, and a lot of my works tend to because I'm a figurative artist, a lot of my works tend to show the female, um, whether that's Mary, or whether it's like the Madonna or some other female character. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
I guess next, wonder if you can ask each other questions if you have any. Like, Victor, do you have any questions for Brendan?
Yeah, so Brandon, like I've noticed, like you're also doing a little, like you talk a little bit about it, but what are your thoughts on traditional works, and how you with your piece you were talking about, like using traditional textiles.
Hmm.
Um, is that something that you see that you're going to explore more in your later works, or
Like explore different
like
traditional.
yeah, like explore traditional art, traditional works, and like giving them more new meaning, or incorporating them into your works?
Yeah. Lately I've been thinking about the like these icons that symbolizes Vietnamese culture, and kind of taking these traditional icons and recontextualizing them. And I've been thinking a lot about how like these institutions like museums hold these artifacts from different cultures from all over the world, and what these artifacts will look like in the future. So I've been thinking about taking, well, I am taking like objects that are very common in Vietnam, like these hats, which are used, like my grandma uses them when she gardens all the time. They're the little triangle hats that are in horrible Halloween costumes. And I've been covering them with gold and letting them tarnish, kind of almost as relics of labor. And I'm thinking about these museum objects in the future, and what they would look like, and what people might think will become like artifacts of right now.
Oh, Brendan, do you have any questions for Victor?
Yeah. I wonder how do you see your art as a coping mechanism for growing up in a strictly Catholicism household?
Yeah, it's really a coping mechanism for um, like moving here.
Mm-hmm.
Like as an immigrant artist, you kind of like the first things that you do is like you recreate the things that you used to be surrounded with. So yes, it's very much a coping mechanism for me, um, doing all this, because like trying to make sense of my new world, and of trying to make sense of myself. Um, it's really hard when because as an immigrant, you're always seen as the other.
Mm-hmm.
So there are parts of you that you're just kind of like, okay, if I'm really the other, what you get comfortable. You find things to make yourself feel comfortable, being the other. I'm not sure if that's translating well,
Or do
but
you see it also as like a way of healing from this anti-gay trauma?
yeah, it's a it's I mean it's really funny, but it's just like it's a salve for almost everything, right? That's happening, like art in general, or like the art that I do. Um, it's a salve for me to like be able to, um, again, connect to the past, and also like a way to be able to somehow gain a footing into the present. and the present, which is a new world, which is the United States.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you both.
Mhm.
Actually, I wonder if we have any questions from the audience, if you can, yeah, ask them to the panelists.
Yes. So can Victor speak to the connection between Mexico and the Philippines in his art?
Yeah, so the Philippines was actually during the colonial times was part of Mexico. Funnily enough, um, we were governed um, by way of Mexico instead of by way of Spain. It is only like later during the after the galleon trade happened, later that after the galleon trade had ended, that Spain um, became really interested in the Philippines. But so the Philippines has influenced Mexico in a lot of ways, and also Mexico has influenced the Philippines. Like one of our language, for example, for mom and dad, nanay and tatay, that is actually Nahuatl. So it's interesting that those words would be brought several oceans away, and there are, in terms of art, a lot of Philippine art or traditional Philippine art are very similar to Mexican art. And there is a lot of really interesting studies out there as to who influenced whom, um, because there's, the Philippine galleon, the ships that comes from the Philippines to Acapulco, Mexico, really was such a strong tie that um, it really like just influenced both sides. Mhm.
Thank you, Victor. I believe we also have a question for Brendan. How has your journey been for creating these different variations of rememory? Did the usage of your work become a form of self-discovery through your reliving or your family reliving a memory?
I feel like it definitely. I feel like this journey creating different types of work, not just photographs or I create works based on the certain history of my family past, and I think the work does both. It's also a form of my own discovery, not knowing the history of my family, and really understanding like what it means to be Asian American specifically, and having this duality, and also when my family experiences the work too, um, I I see their emotions when I create the work, or and I and like we have like like this very emotional connection talking about this history that's not talked about, that's like kind of hidden and like pushed under the rug. And even growing up, there was a lot of like I don't speak Vietnamese, and I wasn't taught Vietnamese because my family wanted to do everything that they could to create like the American that I am now. But there's also this sense of lost identity and not really knowing where you fit in. So I think it's both self-discovery and my family reliving a memory, but I think through the reliving of this memory is a way for us to cope and heal from this past trauma.
That's great. Thank you so much. Ashley, do we have more questions?
Um, I have one question for Victor. So how do you feel like the language barriers your families face kind of influenced your art?
Well, what for me, my personal experience really has been more like my struggle with my accent, like, and this is like probably true for every immigrant, like for the longest time, like people cannot understand what I'm trying to say, but like some like me being so, but I get so frustrated because like I know what I'm trying to say is coherent, but it just doesn't come out very coherent. Um, and it's a struggle at first, but you just kind of just like you make peace with it in a sense. Um, Especially because I mean, if you don't make peace with it, you won't be able to like, you won't be able to come to terms with it. Yeah.
Embrace it, Victor.
Exactly.
Yeah, like even like I had an experience in school during a critique where I showed a video and it was my grandma speaking English and they were like, we can't understand her. You need to put subtitles on it. And they weren't even giving it the time of day to even try, even though she was speaking English and going out of her way to please these people.
That I know exactly. I mean, that's exactly what my experience is. And I'm just like, okay, guys, like I need to talk slower, but at the same time, I'm just like, well, no, this is how I talk.
Yeah, you don't owe them anything.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for like this is a comment on like the comment on what you just said earlier for you, like reimagining histories. Um, I think that's beautiful because I think I see my journey has some parallels with your journey. Like you look into the past and that's how you find. I mean, that's how you understand more about yourself. You know.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And I hope like through my work I can share like the refugee story because it's not uncommon. Like being a refugee is not a choice. It's a matters of survival. Like they
Yes.
didn't choose this life. They didn't choose to come here without anything and have to go to this random country wherever there was a sponsor for them. And I think it's so relevant to other different demographic groups facing migration and refugee issues.
Yeah, it's amazing that it's still happening now that we see refugees as not human at all. I mean it's and they're human just like you and me, and like they deserve to be heard and they deserve to be seen.
Mhm.
I guess though I haven't touched it earlier, but Brendan, you talked about you were previously a Catholic. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So so my family are predominantly Catholic, and um, they were sponsored by a Catholic woman and the Catholic Church, and I'm grateful for that. But when I was going through getting the process of being confirmed because my family wanted me to be confirmed, there was a lot of anti-gay diction that they were trying to enforce, and I was just not about it. And I feel like I also took like a intro to Buddhism class over the summer, and I feel like my ideas more are in line with Buddhism beliefs, and I just think that we should all be good to each other and not be mean.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, Victor, and thank you, Brendan. And thank you for everyone joining us. And again, you're welcome to come to the exhibit, which is on view through November 15th. and the Franjuan Library with reservation required in advance. And this concludes the talk tonight.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.